Yep.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the July 26th meeting of the North Kingstown School Department Building Committee, or Building Subcommittee. We have a lengthy agenda tonight. We have a sheet up at the podium for public comment, which I'll go up and get right now. Thank you. And then again, after these three individuals are done speaking, if something was said where someone realizes, wow, I really would love the opportunity to say something, I'll just ask if anybody else wants to comment. You can pop up that time, and then we'll go on to the rest of the agenda as well. So the first speaker would be Tom Segoras. If you could state your name and address.
Tom Segoras, 15 Boston Neck Road. I enjoyed the outcome of the last building subcommittee meeting where it seemed that progress was happening. I'm making these comments on the basis of what I perceive as the difficulty or ease of trying to persuade people to vote for the options that are coming out. One of the things that I noticed from the last meeting was that it did not seem to me, you were choosing between an option, a one-school option and a two-school option. It did not actually seem to me like the two-school option was prepared in a way that actually seriously considered the possibility. When you looked at the site plan for the Woodford Middle School site, the school was, the school footprint was laughably large, and it seemed as if nobody had actually considered what a two-school solution would actually mean sensitive to that site. It also seemed as if there was far more parking put into the plan than currently exists on the site, and that again raises questions. When I showed these pictures to other people, raises questions that I was unable to answer about, like why is one athletic field lost to all the parking? Why is this school so much bigger than the existing school? And it made it seem as if that option was not actually being seriously considered, and I think that it made it hard for me to defend the project to the other side. The other feedback that I got when I talked to my friends about it was continuing concern about what happens to the Wickford Middle School building. I understand that plans are afoot to actually move forward with Wickford L, but they're not actually visible yet, and so these things are actually on people's mind. And the last thing is that I guess this is a point to the school committee. When people say, "Oh, I would not send my children to Wickford Middle School," there's sort of an implicit rebuke there to all the people who actually did send their children to Wickford Middle School, and I think that it's important to think about making the new school so much better than Wickford Middle that it's actually attractive. But telling people that the existing Wickford Middle is substandard and that one should be embarrassed to send their children there risks alienating a large number of people who should actually be enthusiastic about building a new school. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Diane Hill.
Hi, Diane Hill, 40 Heritage Road. I know there's a lot of, I've been following the building committee and the discussion about the new school buildings. And as the grandmother of two children, two children who are growing up here in Rhode Island, a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, I'm really concerned about their future. I know there's lots of things to be concerned about with these schools, but I can't not say that my main concern is about the kind of climate they're going to grow up in terms of what's going on with climate change. And I think that considering the kind of energy and decarbonization that we need to do with new buildings is the responsible thing to do and the moral thing to do, and not something to just be kind of a sidebar in terms of looking at plans for this building. just yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, it said, July heat waves nearly impossible without climate change, study says. Record temperatures have been fueled by decades of fossil fuel emissions. So I just want to say, I don't want to see us be short-sighted and build a new building with fossil fuels as the energy source. You know, I'm concerned about my grandchildren being able to go outside and breathe air that's not polluted with wildfire smoke, that they can be outside and it's not going to be multiple days of 100-degree weather, and we're still emitting fossil fuel emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, so this is going to keep getting worse. And we can pretend like it's not, but you know, here it is, every day something else. Floods, you know, I just think this is a moral issue, and I want us to pay attention to it. We passed Act on Climate, Rhode Island, in 2019, and I'm going to tell you that I'm somebody here to make sure that it's enforced. So if we don't build a building that's going to be a code so that by 2050 Rhode Island is at net zero with emissions, I'm going to be one of the people who's going to be going to the Attorney General and saying, you need to enforce this law that we passed. So I just want to tell you, sorry, I'm really worried about this for my grandchildren's future, because this stuff, these changes, the scientists are saying are going to be irreversible. So I just ask you to please consider this and not make it just a throwaway when you're making plans for the buildings. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Warbeck?
Hi, my name is Mary Warbeck from 25 North Road, Saunderstown. Recent meetings of the Building Subcommittee and the Town Council included discussions of one new single combined middle school versus two separate schools, analysis of several sites, and comparative costs of restoration versus new build. Obviously, a lot of thought has gone into this, and there was an awful lot to absorb. Perkins Eastman on July 11 presented a plan for two separate schools, each with 600 students and covering 122,000 square feet each. This two-school plan required approximately a third more area than one combined school, with significantly higher total building, operating, and maintenance costs. Two separate schools at Davisville and Whitford sites would not be equivalent, in that one would likely be 2 stories and the other would be 3 to 4 stories, with greater safety and supervisory concerns. There would be inequivalencies in the athletic fields. If a restoration project versus a new build process was chosen, costs could potentially increase due to issues of failing concrete, asbestos removal, etc., doubled construction times. At the July 17 Town Council meeting, it was noted that Mario Carreno had been contacted to learn if 2 schools could actually be built within our $167 million budget. Reportedly, 2 buildings, each having a square footage of 16% less than the 2-school option presented by Perkins Eastman, could potentially fit into that budget. Does this size reduction mean that schools would sacrifice contemporary sized classrooms, gyms, and cafeterias? Is there room for more and better sized science labs, space for career and tech shops, room for common learning spaces? What are the details of this? Finally, and importantly, I believe only one single sentence was devoted to the imminent concerns of meeting our Act on Climate obligations to the state and our citizens. That sentence was that to stay within our $167 million budget, our net zero energy status may be, quote unquote, out of the question if 2 separate schools with associated additional costs were built. With 2 separate schools, North Kingston would not only incur increased costs of design, construction, operations, and maintenance, but we would also be forfeiting one of our reimbursements from the state worth millions of dollars. Conversely, a single contemporary net zero school could reduce energy costs every year by 65 to 80%, which could be applied to hire more teachers, start new programs, and provide educational opportunities to bring our students into a sustainable future. I look forward to hearing more from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public who would like to speak? Okay, thank you. I sent around an attendance sheet for building committee members. If you have not received it, please make sure you take the time to sign it. So if there's any building committee members in the audience, make sure you sign up for attendance. We can get you a seat up here if you want. So it's up to you, because I know you get right in the corner if you want. So it's your call. Okay, you got it. Next item on the agenda is to approve the previous meeting minutes. I think it would be appropriate if we did each of the meetings separately. So there's a motion in order to approve the building committee minutes of May 31st, 2023. I just need someone to so move in a second.
Make a motion to approve the minutes from May 31st, 2023.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? There's a motion in order to approve the minutes from the June 21st, 2023 meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor? Any opposed? And then there's the motion in order to approve the minutes from the July 10th, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve the July 10th, 2023 minutes.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Excellent. The next item will be very brief. It's just a result of some very good conversations that the superintendent and I have had, and also a very good conversation that we had with the chair of the school committee today. And basically, very, very briefly, is a concern of the role of the building committee. Every committee, every city and town is different. I know the superintendent has served on a couple. I've also served on a couple. And one of my concerns, or our concerns, although I don't want to speak for everyone, is that a lot of the things that we're talking about that we're perceived to have a role in is really the role of the school committee and the town council. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things. That way we set the table both for all of us and the public. If there's any questions after I say this, please feel free, and then we'll just go on. But we have spoken as a team to talk about this, and I think a lot of us are on the same page as far as the concern. So I reached out actually to Ride on this very topic. There's not much at all in Rhode Island general law except that there shall be a building committee and what it should be comprised of. Mario had written back just actually saying the same thing, that there's no clear-cut document, that every city and town is different, that every city or town role is different. Some are a subcommittee of the town council, some are a subcommittee of the school committee, not looking to change anything. Some have 8 members, Lincoln has 20, half appointed by the town, half appointed by the district. So he agreed that it's very important that there be a connection between the building committee, the school committee, and the council, that we're all on the same page, and I know we all agree with that part. Having discussed this with the superintendent and the chair of the school committee, the chair had mentioned that she's going to bring this up at the next meeting, just to discuss the role of the building committee for the school committee to set us their expectations. And I think that's important, that we are a subcommittee, and that we know what the expectations are of the school committee. What exactly do they want from us? I think the important thing that we have to know is that, so a lot of this confusion dated back to March, and it's really no one's fault, but when we as a subcommittee, we're voting on, do you go 5 through 8 or 6 through 8? Do we have pre-K? Do we have two buildings or one? Those are really educational decisions, where the superintendent, the school committee will vote on and talk about and bring the public involved, and not really one of the building committee. We can weigh in, but it really should be their decision. The role of the town administration, town council is for funding. We don't have to worry about that. As far as they'll decide what the funding restrictions are, and we work on those restrictions. I think our goal needs to be to listen, to gather information for the school committee, for the town, so that way they have adequate information when making votes. That we address issues, that we make recommendations when we feel fit, and that we ask as many questions as possible. But I just think it's important that the building committee, and that we're meeting the expectations of the school committee, that we're not overstepping those expectations, and that we allow the school committee, whether we agree or disagree, individually as a group, to let them make those decisions, and then let the public have their input at school committee meetings and decide, and also let the council make their decisions and let the public have their input and decide. And we gather information from them, we provide information to them, almost like an asset management commission. Provide as much information to them as possible, and then let them make what they think is best for the school district and for the town. And I just felt it was important that this be talked about briefly as a result of the March meeting, and complete transparency as a result of the recent article that may have shown that that the chairs may be on different pages. And I just think it's important to realize that the role of the building committee is isolated, and that we have to meet the expectations of the school committee. That's really all.
And I'd just like to add, it's, the building committee, it's an advisory committee, right? It's an advisory committee to the school committee. So we should be reviewing documentations that are coming to the committee. We're reviewing, the site reviews, the testing, studies that are being done, any other information that's being brought to us from the project team, and then, through this committee, advising and providing other information to the school committee. But it does come down to the school committee to be making those educational decisions, as we move forward.
Any questions or discussion on this particular matter before we move on to a busy agenda? Great. I'm going to turn it over to the co-chair, the superintendent, to talk about the next few items.
Thank you. As a result of our last meeting, we had asked Perkins Eastman after the school committee meeting to proceed with some environmental studies at the Davisville Middle site. And I'm just going to briefly review what happened. So, at the building committee, this committee did motion and put a request through to the school committee to allocate some funds to do environmental studies at the Davisville Middle site and the Wickford Middle site. That was brought to the school committee that following night. When the school committee had the discussion, they believed that right now we should just allocate some funds for the Davisville site. Because looking at the Davisville site, it is a larger site that's going to provide to the town the amount of land that is needed for a building plus the fields. And when we did look at the Wickford site is smaller and would not allow as much space as we're saying we need for a building plus all of the necessary fields. So the school committee did approve for us to move forward with the Davisville site. So we worked with our project team with Perkins Eastman, Jacobs, our OPM and PAR to do some of those studies. And tonight they're going to present to us what they have found so far. They're going to review that timeline because there is still some additional studies that need to be completed, but they're going to bring us up to date as to what they found and provide us with some of those layouts. So hand it over to you to present. Sure. I do have copies here for the committee, and I did make some for the public. I didn't make as many as I thought I may need, but there are some for you to look at.
Shall we start?
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor and Smolis. Pleasure to be here this afternoon. My name is Joe Costa. I'm an architect and principal with Perkins Eastman. As Dr. Duva mentioned, today we're going to be reporting on some of our site investigations performed over the last couple of weeks since we met in this room and had a discussion about the Wickford and Davisville. Tonight our focus is going to be on Davisville and the McGinn properties. We're also going to provide an update on the feasibility of constructing a new consolidated grade 5 to 8 middle school for 1,200 students on those properties. Our presentation tonight is going to illustrate and explain the opportunities and limitations known to us thus far for developing these properties for your middle school. Obviously, every site will have limitations, and we're going to explain some of those this evening, and also show you how we overcome those limitations and how potentially the site plan can work for your middle school. Our focus is also going to be demonstrating the areas of the site that are actually able to be developed, changed, modified to meet program space needs for the school, as well as address the park amenities. And the goal of our presentation tonight will show you how we're not only preserving some of the amenities on the field, but we're also replicating or replacing anything that's been displaced because of the development proposed by the new school and the spaces required for the new school. We're also going to demonstrate how part of our goal will be keeping the middle school, the current middle school, operational and safe while we build a new school. So our intent is not to build on top of the school or do anything like that, but to really build side by side, keeping the Davisville Middle School fully operational and safe during the entire construction period, and then when that building comes down, modify the site to replicate anything that we've displaced. So there's a phasing component associated with our initial concepts. All of this design work is still at a very early conceptual level, so there's nothing really that's set in stone or concrete. But it does have some very good thinking behind it, and it allows us to build upon some of the fundamental decisions that are going to be made about the site and about the building. It is really quite an exciting site. We think there's a tremendous possibility. It is really quite a beautiful site. It is really quite unique in that a vast majority of the site is going to remain basically a natural wooded environment for forever, and I think that's going to be a tremendous benefit to the school where all of the 5th to 8th grade students are going to go to. So we're going to get right into our presentation. It is very brief. I promise we're not going to be too lengthy tonight. It is summer night. Everybody wants to go home and enjoy the warm weather that's coming. Before we get started, I do want to introduce our team. From Perkins Eastman, I have Tina Greco, your project manager and architect. My left is design principal Mike Berger. Part of our team tonight, we have Par, our civil engineer, which is Dave Potter, sitting right over there, and we're all wearing navy jackets and gray pants, so just in case you wonder who we are. From Traverse, our landscape architect, we have Chris Bradley right here, and Steve D'Ambrosio over there. From Jacobs, we have Inga Knox, who's sitting over at the end of the table, and Sabora Patel in the back seat over there. And way over there, we have Antonetta Roy, who is with Construction Advocacy Professional. I'm not going to forget you this time. So again, keep in mind there's a lot of work that has to be done and a lot of design stuff, and that's really the exciting part of the next steps that we'll be starting to show you how the building will start looking, how it fits together, the relationships of the site and all the different components. We're not quite there tonight, but I promise you Mike and his team have been considering that and have been working toward that end for a really fantastic school design. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tina. Oh, so this is the question that we're trying to answer tonight. So is it feasible to build a new North Kingstown Middle School on Davisville site? And we're going to help answer that tonight.
Okay. So thank you, Joe. So again, thank you. We're happy to be here. Joe just introduced the project team. This slide outlines our project discussion points. In the next few slides, we're going to hear from Dave Potter. He's going to run through some of the site investigation, an update on where we are with all those investigations. Then we'll go on to the project summary, and that's when Steve and Mike will present the concept designs, how we take all of this and make it work on the developable portion of the property. Lastly, we'll go over next steps. So when you hear Dave speak about what we've been doing, there's also, we have a list that we're monitoring of those things that we will continue to vet. And then actually one last thing is we do have a slide for questions, so at the end we'll want to take any questions that anyone has.
Thank you, Tina. So as Joe said, my name is Dave Potter from PAR, professional engineer, site civil engineer, working out of Lincoln, Rhode Island. I've worked in North Kingstown before, and we've looked at the site before. So we were excited to dive into it for the new middle school. So what we have here is a plan. North is up. It depicts the existing Davisville Middle School and the McGinn Park. And these are the two separate parcels that we looked at for placement of the new middle school. School Street is to the northwest of the site. Access to both parcels is off School Street. Post Road is about a half a mile to the east. The Davisville Middle School site is 9.36 acres. We've got the existing building hugging the east side of the property. We've got our access from School Street, large cul-de-sac for pickup and drop-off, staff, faculty parking in the rear. The McGinn Park site, we've got parking near the entrance to the northern part of the parcel. We have tennis courts, other athletic facilities out here, baseball, softball, and a multi-purpose field out here in the back. One other item of note, there's a cell tower that is out in the extent of the property, the furthest to the south, and some old paved areas here that are minimally used. I'm going to start by describing the wetlands. I want to talk about the natural resources that we've been investigating as part of this effort. The first is the wetlands. So last week, we had our professional wetland scientists visit the site and actually delineate the wetlands. They set their flags, which are these tiny white dots, all around here to figure out where exactly those wetland edges are. We then collected them with the GPS device and put them into this map. Now this map is compiled from the information we have to date. We have not yet completed a full survey. That's something that we'll do as we proceed through the design phases and move forward with the project. This is compiled from available record drawings, from GIS information available to the town, and other sources like the state. So we've taken all that information and put it on here for us to work on at this conceptual stage. The wetlands, which are all to the south, east, and a little bit to the north of the property, consist of mostly forested wetlands. There's also a tributary, an unnamed stream, to the northeast of the site. And this tributary contributes to the Sandhill Brook, which flows from west to east, all the way out to the Hunt River and out to the bay, eventually. Each of these different resource areas underneath the new DM regulations, which were enacted in July 2022, have their own setback and buffer off of them. So based on where you are in the state, based on the type of resource area, the size of the resource area, they all have their own buffers. And that's what all these orange lines and white lines and then what all that means. I'm not going to jump to the next slide yet, but when we get there, we're boiling that down to where can you put the building and where can you develop the site. With any type of project, we try to avoid significantly impacting wetlands, and DEM has guidance available for us to avoid a significant impact to wetlands. And so the goal is always to try to avoid that significant impact. So we can work with some of those jurisdictional areas and within those buffer areas, all different around the different wetlands, but ultimately we want to stay within the limits that are set by these boundaries. So we sort of boiled that down, and I'll show you that in a minute. Before I go to that next slide, I want to talk about the other natural resource that we have on this site, which is the floodplain. So there is a floodplain associated with this tributary to the Sandhill Brook. It's actually associated with the Sandhill Brook itself as well. And that is delineated by this blue line right here. So that blue line is the limit of where that brook will flood to in the 100-year storm event. That's a storm with a 1% chance of occurring. It's a very significant storm. These lines, the location of this line and the elevation that this water body will flood to is determined by FEMA. So FEMA comes down and they have maps for all over Rhode Island. And it tells us where that flood elevation will be. And what we do is we study the elevations on the site and we align that line to it. This is what we call a zone AE, which means FEMA did actually figure out what the elevation of that flooding would be in that 100-year storm. So we have that information, and that's how we represented it on this concept. So floodplains, being the ocean state, we encounter floodplains all the time, right? We've done plenty of this. As a civil engineer in my career, I've had plenty of projects with floodplains. Floodplains are reviewed by DEM. So when you're going to work in or around a floodplain, you have to make sure that you do not fill in the floodplain and lose space for that flood water to go, right? Just like a bathtub. You know, if you put a large mass into a bathtub, the water level is going to rise. And it is not allowed to put something in a floodplain or modify grades in a floodplain without proving to DEM with detailed calculations that you are not going to raise those floodwaters. So ultimately, we can't have any net loss in flood storage because it will impact the floodplain, and that will be heavily reviewed by DEM. should we work within the floodplain, which seems likely on this site. We'll get there. I think, yeah, I think that's it on the floodplain. The other piece I want to note is also working within the floodplain. When we put buildings in or near the floodplains, we want to make sure they're above the floodplain, right? They have to be above the floodplain. The building code demands that, right? It tells you have to be a certain distance above that floodplain. CHIPS has their own requirements for it. So that's the other piece of this, is you know, any structure within the floodplain has to be designed in accordance with the building code and those requirements. And so the challenge to a design team is to figure out the best way to achieve that, to achieve the goals of the school, of the site, while also not putting the building below the floodplain and not resulting in a loss of volume within that floodplain. And it's very much possible, you know, when we work together as a team with all the consultants to make that happen. We've seen it done many times. Next slide. Thank you. So I'll move away from natural resources to utilities. I'm just going to touch on water and sewer. So water for the existing school comes from School Street. There's a water main in here. It serves the existing building. We expect it to serve the proposed building. We haven't gotten into the detail of how much water they're going to need for the proposed building and availability yet, but that's the next step. That's something that we're looking into still. As far as septic goes, as far as wastewater, so the existing site is served by on-site wastewater treatment systems, which is the state's official name for a septic system. And that septic system that serves this site is served by several different leach areas. You can see the 4 polygons we have shown on this plan. The nickname of that is septic. Right? So these were all constructed in 2005. We have the record plan that we obtained through the town records that showed us where all those leaching areas are located. So we know the size of them, we know the capacity, we know, you know, where they were before. So we have a lot of good information there. And you can see that they're located within vegetated areas. That's typically the preference. So they're actually in the outfield of this ball field. There's one in a vegetated area to the west of the parking lot, and then there's 2 other smaller leaching areas. The system as it is not large enough to support a much larger student population for the new middle school. So one of the next things we're doing is looking into how do we provide wastewater treatment. We provide it through a larger OWTS system, or we've also just taken a look at public sewer and the availability of public sewer. Public sewer right now is about 1.5 miles from the site. It's down Post Road to the southeast of this property. It would take a sewer extension to bring it to the site to make that connection. There is a plan for the expansion of the wastewater system in town, and that's they're expecting that within 5 to 10 years there would be a sewer extension up Post Road. We have a lot more to figure out there, but that's the 2 options that we're looking for sewer. OWTS, and then also the public sewer. There's a lot of information. Before I hand it over, I can answer some questions on this.
We're gonna wait for questions, just so if you don't mind, we'll go back, that's okay.
Yeah, and then I just want, did you want to just highlight the developable versus the red area?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Tina. So, boiling all the buffers and jurisdictional areas and buffer zones, all those terms down to 2 lines. Ultimately, in yellow is the limit of where we can put the building. So if the building has to stay within that yellow line, so that to meet the DEM requirements and have a good chance of being an insignificant alteration. The site limit of disturbance can extend to the magenta line out here. So again, when you boil all it down, all that wetlands information down, looking at the buffers, jurisdictional areas, and everything, that's the limit of our site development. So you can see we do have a pretty big envelope that we can work within on this site. And then finally, just to reiterate, that floodplain is here. We can work within it. Just have to make sure the building's above the floodplain and make sure that we generate no fill, no loss of space for that flood water to be stored in the event. All right. Thank you.
Okay. So a lot of information there. So what we attempt to do here is kind of boil it down
to what all that information means. Last time we met a couple weeks ago, the team was out there, did a lot more research. The good news is that there's really no big game changers. It's what we expected. Some of the buffers, the wetland buffers, have increased based on new regulations that have been adopted. So that just means that this yellow line kind of creeped in a little bit, but wetlands were generally an area that we were anticipated. So what this means, that yellow line that Dave just mentioned, we can't build beyond that, and that's what we knew. We just wanted to confirm that with all this additional information gathering. We were aware of the 100-year floodplain, and I'm sure everyone in this room, or mostly everyone in this room, has been to the site, and you really don't even perceive the slope change on the site. So we're not suggesting putting a new school up on stilts high on a site. It's a very gradual floodplain, and it's really at the edge of the floodplain. So we're talking feet. We haven't set the building elevation yet, but we're talking within feet. The existing middle school, for reference, when you're out there, that's elevation 42, I believe, so it's about 4 feet above, plus or minus the floodplain, and you almost don't perceive that on the site. So, assume the new school will be around a similar elevation as the existing if you travel by the site. What this illustrates here, last time we were here, we presented that the plan would be to preserve the 3 existing fields, athletic fields, on the northeast portion of the site. Obviously, everything within McGinn Park, the tennis courts, the skate park, and the basketball courts. There's 2 fields where we will be developing, will be relocated, actually out of the floodplain, which is nice, up on the existing footprint of the existing school. Dave mentioned the existing septic systems, the newest one in 2005. A reminder that the school will be occupied, so the school needs to function as it does today. So what we've identified here, not around school, but an area that we can identify as the buildable area for the school. Missing the fields, missing the wetlands within the buildable area, trying to miss as much of the flood zone as possible, and we will continue to squeeze the building down as we design it to try to miss as much of the flood zone as possible, but also these existing septic fields so the school can function as it currently does today. So I think this is a good summary of all the hard work that the team has put together. From here, this is all part of the analysis. I think now we're going to dig into the first really initial steps of conceptually laying out the site and how all these parts and pieces fit within it now that we know the environmental constraints and limitations. So just as a reminder, we're looking at a consolidated 5 to 8 school with 1,200 students and around 180,000 square feet. I should mention, I guess there's some questions about the accuracy of these footprints. The footprints that you do see on the site are based on real numbers and real architectural diagrams based on the 21st century education school and adjacencies of spaces within that school. So the footprints that you do see are realistic and to scale on the site. And as we continue to develop, as we continue to design these buildings, you start to see the details within the building. All right. So with that, Steve, you wanna...
So Mike covered a lot of what potentially can happen on this site. What we did is we have taken all of that information and we're kind of starting to translate it into real world shapes. So what we're showing here is the proposed middle school using one of the footprints that Perkins Eastman provided. We're locating it potentially in the back of the site. Gives nice setting for all the classrooms at the back of the school. It also allows for a lot of upfront stuff to happen between School Street and the school. So where we see here the yellow and the red dashed lines, those are circulation patterns for either cars or buses. We haven't determined which works best yet, but what we do know is that we can accommodate about 20 buses and about 40 to 60 cars for parent drop-offs. So these show the general pathways that they would take coming in from the existing curb cut at the main entrance of the school, looping around, and there might be a center spline here that both the buses and the students get dropped off and then collectively move into the front entrance of the school. We looked at parking. The goal that we've been looking at is around 125 to 150 spaces. We can accommodate that. It gets up to closer to 200 when you include the existing parking at McGinn Park. And then additionally, we have the relocated baseball field and relocated softball field. Oops. Touch the screen. So they both fit. We get proper orientation for the ball field. would be an updated ball field, updated softball field. Softball field is pretty similar to its orientation now, a little bit improved. It would be all new facilities. And as Mike mentioned, they would be out of the floodplain, which would potentially provide more time throughout the year to use them. It won't be as flooded or soggy. And then lastly, we have a couple other circulation patterns going around the school for emergency service and access to the cell tower at the rear of the school. So I think basically, this is a phased plan. We get the new school. Once the existing school comes down, then we can start working on the fields and the parking lots, and it all comes together pretty nicely.
We're anticipating how.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Okay, and once again, try to simplify a little, not simplify, but I think talk about some of the positive opportunities here. A lot of this presentation was based on limitations, which is part of the process. But in the end, the bottom line is that we will not be making any compromises to the design of the school, and how the school, the safety, the educational aspects, and the way the building lays out on the site. First of all, locating the school farther away from the street, kind of towards the quieter portion of the site, is something that we would, potentially look at on a site we can build anywhere. It's perfect for queuing, as Steve just mentioned. It takes the current queuing length, which you see here in the roundabout at the existing school, and elongates that and brings more cars off of the street onto the site, queuing on site and dropping more students off site, both parents and cars, which is great. Love the public comment about sustainability, and we are passionate about that. And from day one, the way we started to lay out the building, the way we orient classrooms, trying to get a southern or northern exposure, trying to avoid the east and west. We have a great opportunity here. We're looking at most likely a 4-story academic block in the back, and trying to crank that around to get proper orientation, which has an impact on daylighting, mechanical systems, you name it. The front portion of the school, closer towards the parking and facing the street, would be your administration, and then your public zone, your gathering spaces, your gym, your auditorium, your cafeteria, and those larger box spaces, most likely a 2-story building up towards the front, and as I mentioned, the quiet academic zone in the back, closer, and kind of embracing this natural setting, which will always be a naturally wooded setting, which is great. Nothing will ever be built there. As Steve mentioned, we mentioned a couple times, relocating the athletic fields up and out of the flood zone. Currently, the floodplain really bisects the main baseball field. Now this is up out of the flood zone and actually oriented in a safer, better orientation facing a northeast. So there are a lot of really positive aspects about this, and we're excited to continue to develop this. And I think that's it. What's the next slide? Next steps.
Okay, so thank you. You can see that the team has been working hard to uncover, to find out as much about the site. We are tracking those things that are still in process and some of the next steps that are involved. And Dave Potter, so we have this list here. It includes the ESA Phase 1 and geotechnical, which I'm going to ask Dave to talk a little bit about, traffic study, and then land use approval, which includes some of the zoning for each of the sites. So maybe Dave, if you could talk a little bit about geotechnical and ESA.
Sure. I'll start with what we call a Phase 1 environmental site assessment. It's a standard format for a desktop review of environmental information associated with any site. They're used in land transactions, and they're actually required as part of the RIDE Stage 2 process. And so what we do in that process is we research records from DEM and other available sources. So we look at any records we can find about any environmental history. When I say environmental, I'm not talking about wetlands. I'm talking about any release of contaminants or anything that could be an environmental concern outside the building. And so we have started that process for this site. We're hoping to have that done later on in the month of August. We're going to be working with the town and the school department to gather those records and review them, and then find out what what that means, if there is anything that we find. geotech. So RIDE also requires a geotechnical study be completed for a stage 2. And when I say geotech, their primary interest is to make sure that the building is on solid ground. They want to make sure that it's on a suitable bearing system. In places in this state and others, there's soils that exist that need special types of foundations to support a building. And so the geotech report, our preliminary geotech report at this stage 2, at this early phase, is really required so that you can identify whether or not you need to put in some type of more expensive than a typical shallow conventional foundation system. So you can understand that cost early. That's really what they're trying to achieve. And so we have a boring program that we'll be conducting later in mid-August to try to, we'll drive, a boring machine will go to the site, it'll drive down several feet and grab samples and look at the soils, and our geotech engineers will tell us what that means for the foundations. Okay. Then we've got traffic too, which I'll turn to you.
Okay, so yeah, just, so the traffic study, actually a lot of, we did already have, or our traffic consultant had gathered some information on Davisville when we were looking at the earlier site, just because it was, it's one of the 2 middle schools of North Kingstown. They'll be putting that together with, they will need to, once school starts, make some other observations during the school year. Then land use approvals, both sites, the school site is considered a P zone. The town site, the McGinn Park site, is a conservation zone as well as an open space zone. And we know that we need to continue conversations with the town and the planner on that. In addition, there is the cell tower, which there are easements involved with all those things. So those conversations are ongoing, and we are going to continue to look into that.
Thank you, Tina. At this point, we want to open it up to questions, and we can also go back to any slide that we showed earlier, but we do want to make sure that everybody's questions are properly addressed. So,
Good. Does anyone have any questions? Comments? Tom?
Are there any restrictions on the land that you're aware of?
So yes, so the conservation, actually, so to go in a little more detail, that the conservation zone, which actually we have to say that we do need to find out more information, but we do know that the National Park Service does have some jurisdiction over that. And so we have to find out, what that means. We do know that while we're using some of that space, we're also now taking some of the Davisville school site and opening that up. So in other words, it's almost as if, it's a swap. The open space that was in the McGinn Park is now being transferred to or in this plan is being suggested and relocated to the Davisville school site.
Have you encountered these kinds of restrictions when you dealt with other projects in other parts of the country?
I do know that we've encountered open space, actually with the school site adjacent to it, and that actually is a nice sort of almost symbiotic relationship. A National Park Service having jurisdiction over something, I personally have not been involved with that.
I have just recently gone through a project in Pawtucket. I don't think they've completed the transfer yet, but we have worked with the city to transfer, to swap, similar to what Tina and Joe are describing. It's something we could look into more and get more information on how that works.
What's your time frame on that? If you know.
I don't know the time frame on that one. I looked at it earlier this year. The Pawtucket project, I looked at it earlier this year. I don't know where it stands right now. I could find out more information.
Okay, that's fine. The first slide that sticks out at me is you asked, is this project feasible? Your word. Do you consider it to be feasible?
we do. We think it is feasible. There are some challenges and some hurdles that we have to go over, but it's nothing that we have not overcome on other school projects in the past, including the flood. We're building actually 2 high schools right now that are significantly in higher flood zones, actually coastal flood zones, which this one is not. And we've addressed those, and when you see the designs, you can't tell that it's in that zone. It is completely protected, and it's met all the requirements, including DEP and all those kinds of things. So
Have you seen anything in this project up to this point that has caused you to say, my God, we can't go forward with this, that this is not gonna work?
thus far, no, we haven't seen anything that would be a showstopper for us.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff?
How much flexibility do you have with the size of the sewer as it stands? In other words, if you started going on and saying, gee, we need a second gym, or we should have had a larger auditorium, or we should have had you know, something else, a bigger library, do you have enough room to I'm looking at this very tight space, and you're going 4 stories up already, that's a lot.
To answer that question, one of the things that we will always do in our designs is identify areas where the building can be expanded in the future. We know that education changes. We also know that enrollment changes. We don't know what's going to happen 30 years from now. But what we'd like to do is identify on our site plans and our designs areas that the school can grow and it could easily be extended and expanded. So we're not quite there yet, but that'll be one of the design considerations. We do have a very well-developed program to serve the 1,200 students, and it is forward-thinking. It does have a little bit of elbow room, so we're not, up against the limit right now, but that's something that we'll consider as we design the building.
I just got a few concerns, not concerns, so recommendations or guidance and questions. The first, we talked about the sewer and the expansion. So I can tell you that, and Adam, if I say anything we want to add on, please jump in because the microphones will catch you here at the podium. So Adam's a public works director. But I can tell you that tying into sewer would be a long shot, and that is because we don't have any short-term plans to move what's called Post Road North. And one of the reasons is a few of the reasons are the cost, the benefits to surrounding businesses because the assessments are so high, and also if we expand our sewer system much larger, we have a strong financial commitment towards Quonset to expand their wastewater system. So I just need to hear that if tying into the sewer is not feasible, that you feel we could provide proper septic system in this area to accommodate the school.
Well, with the information that we have now, the new septic system was put on the site in 2005. The areas that we would be looking for the new system would be the outfields of the ball fields that you have here. So, knowing that the system was possible back in 2005, our expectation is that it would be possible to expand that for WTS. And that's part of one of our next steps, is to look further into sewer, water, make sure those facilities are available. So we're going to keep digging into that, but it's great that you have that information.
If we can help it
on that, yeah.
Please reach out to Adam, myself, and we can help it. Again, I see that. Would you agree that's going to be a long shot? So I just want to make sure that it's just the cost factor is so great, and the benefits to the surrounding businesses are not. The assessments will be so high, and we have an issue with Quonset. So I just wanted you to have the information, and if we can help, let us know.
I appreciate that.
Second is 2 questions on the existing fields. So the existing fields remain, that's great news. Can they be utilized during construction is question number 1. They can?
Oh, yeah,
Excellent.
So that's the intent. So that's, and maybe we could make that even clearer.
Yeah.
Go back a couple
Because
slides.
that would be
Yes,
very
that's
important.
that's the intent.
That's the intent, and maybe we should add a layer of a diagram. The idea would be to find a point for construction access. Maybe there's a new curb cut or something that works into the plan where construction access would be limited to this area here, where McGinn parking and access to these fields on the east side, northeast side will remain available. Same thing, the school would operate on this side. So you really see it as 3 zones: school zone, an isolated kind of corralled construction zone, and then the park zone.
So that's great news, great news. And if you find that it's going to be an issue, as much advance notice to the town would be helpful, because then we can work with your leads and find relocation. So that way we don't inconvenience anyone, but that's great news. Yep.
It will impact the 2.
Yes.
other fields, right?
Yes,
So
yeah.
we would have to have that discussion of
Exactly.
what
We
happens
can
there
help.
and,
Yeah.
Exactly.
you know,
We can help the
other
school.
space around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was concerned about the Little League and
Sure.
football, so excellent. And then also, you mentioned borings in the larger field. And I'm assuming those borings will be taking place over the next few weeks.
That's the plan.
So just let you know that large field right there begins getting enormous usage on Tuesday.
Yeah.
The local football team starts, so my point is, I'm not sure if the field can be used and they'll be doing borings, just keep us up to date, because on Tuesday, that whole area is going to change from what you've seen over the last couple of months. Cars, hundreds of kids, parents, it's that busy, and I believe it's mostly nuts, but I just wanna let you know that, so.
Sure.
So,
Just Ralph, you know, when we met this morning talking about it, we talked how
Yeah.
we're gonna need to coordinate that with the town because of the
Excellent.
usage there, so.
excellent. Because the other two fields would be easy, that big field is gonna be, it's gonna be tough. We'll figure it out, but I just wanna let you know, it's gonna really change on Tuesday.
And Dave, would you need to do borings in the rectangular field, or would it just be in the outfield of where the actual school footprint is?
So we're doing we have to put together, on a plan, we have to lay out where our borings are gonna go. So we have to dodge existing utilities, and we often come across constraints like this. We wanna stay out of areas where students or athletes might be walking or playing. Borings aren't as intrusive as test pits. You know, boring is actually a pretty small diameter. There's a pile of dirt that they'll generate, and they'll put that dirt back into the hole. So in the end, you'll see disturbance, but it won't be a vast disturbance. I think the goal of the boring program at this stage would be to try to stay out of those fields, out of those areas, so that we can minimize any impact to the athletes.
Because the
Trucks
boring,
coming in and out too, so.
Yeah.
because the borings, correct me if I'm wrong, that's to determine the type of foundation that would be needed. So if we're not planning on building in the Little League field or the football, soccer complex or the other open space field,
Right.
we probably wouldn't be doing borings there.
We wouldn't be going that far to the north or the east. We'd want to concentrate them in the area of the proposed building.
The orange circle.
But I would assume there was some heavy machinery coming in and out, so.
Yeah, there's two types of machines. There's a machine that runs on tracks and a machine that runs on tires. I mean, they can dig up the ground a little bit, but we can talk to our sub-consultant and see if they can.
And I was referring to kids running around and whatnot, so.
Yeah,
It's just gonna
we
get,
wanna
I guess my
make sure.
point is that, I'm sure you visited the site many times, and what you've seen is gonna change dramatically next week. So, okay, that's my point, and we're here to help. We're here to help.
And your best access is probably to the south of the street.
Right, yeah.
From the south,
Right,
that's right.
And that would make things a lot easier, so.
Sure, right in there.
Yeah.
Skirting around
Good.
the backside of it.
So there'll be some parking over there, but that's about it, so.
Yeah.
And then could you move to, my final question, could you move to this slide that says conceptual site layout? That way. So again, this may sound like a very minor point, but I'll bring it up anyways, I think it is minor. But when looking at this, the first thing that jumped out, and only because we're experiencing this problem elsewhere in North Kingstown, is, and we have some good ball players here in North Kingstown, is the two ball fields you have, you're going to be hitting balls into each field, because the outfields connect rather than the infields. The infields connect, I know you can't do that, the infields connect, you wouldn't have that problem. Outfields connecting, that could be an issue, and also the parking directly behind center field. Just mentioning that, I don't know, I'm sure your options are limited, and we're not gonna arrange a building of a middle school around one heck of a ball player, but I can tell you that we are experiencing that problem at Wilson Park right now, where I've been at a game where they're yelling because kids have to duck because the balls come from one field to another, so. Just something to chew on, and if you can make some changes, so be it.
It's a good point. And Chris, I don't think we talked about this. What are those dimensions on us? Because I know when we were talking about the other site, we were spent a lot of time on size of baseball field.
What we're planning on is exactly what we talked about for the Quinnesset site. So I believe it was 300 feet and then 350 center field. I believe it
So the existing DMS site where the school is going to be measured out was like 295, Bob?
Yep.
It was 295, is that center or number one?
It was to the center we did first, that was 295, and then it was, I think at 270. I'm trying to remember, on the baseline.
We'll have to build a green monster in center field.
That's okay.
Well, they're doing that right now. He's actually doing netting between backstops. That's all you would need to do there would be, telephone pole netting.
But you're right, it's ironic though to have the netting in the outfield instead of the backstop, but I'll leave that to them. But that's okay, I'll leave that to, you're right, Jack, and I know you've done this many times. I just wanted to bring that up, and you can decide how you want to handle that. But I see issues with parking, and it's safety issues. Like I said, I've been there where people have almost been injured from the balls flying. We've actually just put up a net at Wilson Park to address that very issue, so.
So we're tight on space and we're
I know.
maximizing the fields as much as possible and having them as safe as possible. So as Dave said, next steps, as we dig into the design, if we move forward with this, we keep all of that in mind.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are those fenced outfields or are those fields connected?
Right now, it's a bubble diagram. Once we get into design
Then you,
and once we talk to the staff in the town, we'll go through all of that. Yep.
The one problem that you might think about in that one with the baseball field is bathroom on concession. I mean, there's not a lot of area, but you don't want a kid to be running to the far side of the middle, you know. You should have a building that has a smooth, that doesn't have to be a big building. Find somewhere to just put a 20 by 20 building in there someplace.
It'll be close to the septic field that we're planning on football fields.
Kelly has a question.
Just a couple of things, I know before we had said the two-story.
Kelly, can you
two-story-
just stand up to the
Sorry.
mic so it's, it's not active. Never mind, it's
Just
not
kidding.
active. Just talk.
We talked about the.
Use your teacher voice.
Okay, the two-story academic buildings, and I know keeping the existing fields, it looks like that's what's taking us away from that. I am truly concerned about a four-story building. Also wondering if in the design there would be multiple elevators if one goes down, which I don't know if that's part of it. And I'm assuming there'll be climate control, so the fourth story wouldn't be like the inferno.
It's not an
And then also just looking at the traffic flow in terms of teacher parking and teacher, I guess, kind of safety. I just see that second parking area and teachers crossing parent traffic, and it's a little nerve-wracking. And also just noting that it seems, and I'm terrible with distance, but it seems rather far from the building. Just putting that out there, selfishly.
A lot of those things will be addressed and fleshed out, and I appreciate your comments after a few weeks ago. We've presented the first plans and your concerns about pinch points and circulation, and what you're not seeing underneath this footprint is the workings of the academic wing with multiple connection points to alleviate all that. And in 4 stories, it'd be great if you can get it 3 or 2, but I think we're going to work our best to make 4 work well for the school, and there'll be a number of iterations and ways we can work on that.
I'm also worried about 4 stories is a lot to climb, especially if students are first period, first floor, second period, just.
Yeah, and we're sensitive to that as well, and the first part of the building is 2 stories as well. So a lot of those specials might be located on that second floor.
And
So
transfer.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. So we're mindful of some of the challenges and look forward to working out with you guys.
Yes.
One of the things that seems to come up a lot with the community is the 5th graders, and I know in the past you've spoken about this. I wonder if you can address that at all now, and also with the 4-story building, how that affects goals of net zero.
Sure. I think we can address the 5th grade a little bit more in depth as this moves forward. But in general, 4 grades with 4 levels, create some really nice kind of separation between grades when you want it. So there can be a 5th grade wing where the other grades do not circulate through. So that's their kind of isolated area. And when they do leave their wing, they have the shortest travel distance to get to the specials, to your gym, to your CAF. They're closest to the front door, closest to administration and guidance, etc. And then we see as you work your way up to the building, 8th grade most likely, the most responsible young adults. Will be at the top floor. So again, we're looking at making it feel like a learning community where it wants to be, but then creating those quiet academic zones where students feel like that they belong, right? So net zero. I think just sustainability-wise, I have a smaller footprint, which is great. Less of an impact on the ground, so less impervious surfaces, which is actually a bonus for the site. But I think with ways that we shape the building, like I mentioned, solar orientation and how we make this building really perform and how we look at the envelope is really how net zero and sustainability is looked at. So, yeah.
Sure.
Just wondering, as the parameters of the 100-year floodplain are set now, and things change, and climate change, is there any resiliencies that have to be built in? Could that change? Is there any projection of that change?
Sure, that's a great question. So, when we look at working in our flood zones, we take the information from FEMA, and we also, talk to our clients about how high they want to be above that flood plain, with the building. And knowing that climate change is a big topic of conversation, it's a very real concern. And as engineers, we deal with it in all of our coastal work and our floodplain work. Looking at how much higher they want to be over the floodplain, and how to achieve that is part of what we will look at when we establish that building finish floor elevation. So yeah, it's something that will be part of our conversations.
I just had a question. When you talked about the swap, can you clarify that? Just what do you mean by, does that mean like deforestation or just let it fallow, or what would that swap actually entail? The swap of having to cut into some of the conservation area, but then you're gonna have some of the field area.
Okay, let me jump into it. I think it's we'll overly simplify it. It's basically taking, it's two properties right here. This is the school property. You might be able to not see this white line here is designated for the school property. This other line over here, which extends way down into the wetlands, which is cut off and back around to School Street. So we're talking about taking this area that we're basically cutting out of what is currently the open space to develop the school and the circulation and the parking. And those fields that are displaced, and basically flipping those over. So basically taking those fields and the open space, which we're calling open space, which are the fields, and recreating those on this part of the site.
Okay, so that's not actually cutting into the wooded area.
Correct. No, exactly. No, we're not allowed to cut into any wooded area. So anything that's wooded now will remain wooded. Yeah. That's within the wetlands. Yeah.
If I can quickly elaborate on that very quickly, just to thank you, just to let you know, one of the main concerns we got in the swap is that the physical school right now is not part of the conservation easement. The property where they're looking to build the school is part of the conservation easement. So that would be the swap. By putting the fields on what is now not a conservation easement and making that a conservation easement, you now have an equal swap. I think that's what
That's
you're
correct. That's the intent.
That's what we're thinking, yeah.
And that's what we have to look into. So we were talking earlier about working with the National Parks Association. We have to make sure that's allowable.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Just a quick question. I think I probably know the answer to this, but for the current students at the time you're doing construction, will they be in the existing building and then you'll just be doing the construction around students?
Yes, that's exactly right. Our intent is to keep the existing school fully operational and not disrupt what they do on a day-to-day basis. That's the intent of the plan. So you can see the footprint does not overlap the existing new building at all. Once we're done with the new building, then the students will be moved into the new facility, and then we'll go and build the ball fields and finish up the parking. That's the intent.
When you guys get ready to do the borings, if you can make sure that they're prepared, they're going to have to be in the field a little bit, I do suspect, correct? Outfield of the.
We'll work a plan together and we can.
If they do go out there, irrigation and then tire ruts, we're going to jump right into baseball season very, very quickly. They spent a lot of money out there in the last couple of years, and we just want to make sure that there's as much as possible to least disruption, please.
Yeah, we'll work with you on the boring plan. Locating underground utilities is going to be.
Yeah, we'll have to have somebody out there. After the irrigation line, we don't know about it, so we'll have somebody with it.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question. What's the timeline for all of this? When is it all projected to be completed?
Do you wanna take this one?
Sure. Assuming if we go with this plan, the timeline remains within the same guidelines that we had previously for the Good Nesset site. So start of construction in 2025 and finishing 2027, I believe. 24 months construction period. The timeline has shifted slightly with stage 2 application to RIDE, which is now going to happen in February, but this is not going to impact the design timeline and the start of construction. So we will have to rework certain things, but we're still planning to proceed as originally hoped. Of course, if something changes, if we're doing 2 middle schools or there's something else that's going on, then we'll have to revisit the timeline.
Thank you for putting this together. I think you did a very good job showing us the site and the potential use and what we can do here at the Davisville site. We know there's still some work we have to do, and we'll come back to revisit that as well, hopefully in the next few weeks.
Yes.
So
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The next item on here is to review the refined athletic fields at the Davisville Middle School site, which we have been talking about. But Ralph and I thought it was important for us to put this on the agenda to have a discussion regarding the fields, because we know right now those fields that are there are town rec fields.
I thought they were school fields. Those aren't school fields?
They're not school fields. Those fields belong to the town and the rec department. The school uses them, so we have a mutual agreement that, work out scheduling between the use of the fields for the school. But we did want to have the conversation that, we're going to have to work on this together and discuss how those fields will be used and also the relocation of those fields. And we both had these two conversations. We're going to need to continue the conversation. But what we have discussed is that they're town fields, they would stay town fields. We're not looking as a school to take them over, so that wouldn't cause any problems with use or trying to have to find new athletic fields in the future. But keeping that mutual agreement that we have, that looking at the fields that are here between the baseball fields, the soccer field, the multi-use field that's used for football, that those fields are there, that we would continue working together on when does the town need it for their town rec programs, when are the fields needed for the school athletics for the middle school as well. And we wouldn't lose any space with this plan. If anything, the town's going to gain 2 brand new baseball fields. It's a baseball field and a softball field. And then potentially what we would look at doing is looking at how we can enhance the drainage, because the other fields are in a flood zone. And so what can we do with this project so that way we can enhance the drainage issues that currently are happening within the other fields. And that, again, this would improve the fields for the town. So, we're looking at, rebuilding a brand new, middle school for the town, but also within this project, it also enhances the fields for the town, and we would continue having that conversation together. So, any questions, comments regarding that?
Are we still working in the same constraint, financially speaking, of keeping it under that limit? Okay, correct. I just wanted to
Yes, that is still the limit.
Or you mean like the 165?
Yeah, to make sure that
we're
you're right. So I just want to make sure that this doesn't increase
site
it.
allows it. Yeah, the
Yeah,
site
that's what I
allows us to stay with.
And when I'm saying potentially, because we have to look into that cost, but that is something that we've talked about, where we want to be able to do if we can. So.
And as we're discussing this, that will also satisfy the easement issue. So, because as the superintendent just mentioned, by keeping it under the town responsibility, the town still has the same amount of recreational land. So that was actually something we discussed last night, and that was a recommendation of the superintendent. So I think it makes a lot of sense. And so what the goal here is just to let the building committee know, and the school committee, the council know, which we have done, that we'll be negotiating this and presenting findings to the committee, for those working on it, council, school committee, and so far I think that together, I think we've pretty much come up with a pretty good plan.
So then the next item on the agenda is a project cost comparison of a new build versus renovation addition. This was something that I had asked to be placed on the agenda. I know there has been conversation. People have asked, why aren't you just renovating the buildings? And I think it's really important that we have this conversation. We put it out there so everyone understands why that we are looking to build a new middle school, not just renovate the buildings. And Inga has a presentation to review that for us.
I don't have it.
I emailed.
Do you have it? If I can send it to you.
Sorry. I can start.
That's right, we'll start getting it.
Which was built in 1932, Davis was built in 1957. Part of the building.
Do you have it, Mike? If you make sense.
Yeah, I just have to pull out my email real quick. No, I thought about that, but. Enjoy my emails.
Just one button.
photos.
One button.
Bad enough hacking.
No vacation photos.
No, not this one.
Which one is it?
No, just before that. I need to go by my email prior to this.
This one?
No, it's
This one?
not. Right, yes, the PDF
Doesn't
file.
matter which one. Let me just download it, 'cause otherwise it's.
Okay, I'll actually go up there. So there's two slides that I put together, and I think those are mostly questions that came up at the last few meetings. One of them is the first one, which is, isn't it the next topic, ride reimbursement? We can touch on both of them, it's not,
No, but I would say that goes into, like,
it goes into, right.
reasons for the new build versus renovation, so.
All right, so if we can go to the next one first, right, so, we looked a little bit into what the pros and cons of, specifically Davisville site. Renovations are site-specific. You can't really say it's more expensive or less expensive. It's site-specific, it's building-specific, it's case-specific, and how much you add on to the building. When was the building built? Davisville is a 1960s building. For a consolidated option, so this concentrates on a consolidated option where the school is bigger, and we're not really investigating the option, but to answer the question, we would need to basically add almost double the size of existing building. So existing building is roughly, and I think it's 89,000 or 90,000 square feet at the moment. We would need to double its size to fit the program. The biggest concern, if we were to go and renovate and add to the existing Davisville building, we would have to find a swing space, which is cost, disruption. We would need to find a way to host students, whether it's in the existing building or somehow have some temporary locations for them. So that is the biggest challenge of this particular site in this particular case. And it's a cost driver, it's a logistics driver, and it also adds to the schedule. There are obviously some obvious maybe benefits to building on the site, because if you look at it, we can build without the flood zone and build in where the existing school is. So that helps the site development and also helps the cost of site development. And this could be a pro to that. But the disruption that it would cause to 2 years of students that are basically going to be in swing space is way more challenging, and well, it's my personal opinion, but is disruptive to the operation of the school and costly as well. So building new, there is a robust budget, and building new will likely cost less than building an addition. It will allow us for a faster, more streamlined design and logistics overall as a construction. The building will be more efficient, a new building. It will save on operating costs in the future. It will also allow us to do more, to meet more of those net zero sustainability goals. Not that you cannot do that in the renovated version of it in addition, but it is much more cost effective to do it in the new construction. What else did we have? It will also be, a new building is always, it meets the educational program. It will allow for a safer and more secure building with better systems in place in general. If you go with renovation and if you go towards addition, there are challenges with existing building, what it presents, and there is so much unknowns that within the building that it may look less expensive in the beginning, but it tends to cost more towards the end once you uncover all the issues, how you tie the two together. So we tend to recommend higher contingencies. There is higher escalation for longer construction time. So the end cost ends up being higher, and you also get a building that is much more expensive to operate down the future, because anything that's you tie in, it's basically retrofitted, right? So there are going to be limitations on the systems that we can put in place, clearances, how it's going to go together. That is why in this particular case, with the budget in place, with the site in place, there is more pros to building new than renovating. Is there any questions?
Inga, I just want to add, we want to make sure that every penny that you're spending on your project is going to the families and children of your community. With the renovation, you spend a lot of time on money that doesn't actually end up into the building at the end. The swing space is temporary, so that's money spent and lost. Your drives that you're creating to get to that temporary space is money that's spent and also lost. Investigation of any type of asbestos or anything within the building is also spent and lost. So that's money that you want to look into your future of your new building to make sure you're actually getting it for your families and children of your community, not just wasted money that you're spending.
Next one, we'll touch on
Forward or back?
So we started looking at what potential incentives could be applied if the consolidated building, middle school, would be built on the Davisville site. There is a range of minimum of 15 to maximum of 20 additional points that we see can be targeted. The health and safety educational enhancements and newer and fewer are sort of given because you get the two first ones automatically just by building the newer, better facility and educational program. Newer and fewer is the consolidation of the two schools, so that's also a given. Replacement, it's also a point that we can target. It does require a reevaluation, which I had pointed out in there, and it's basically reevaluating the FCI, which is Facility Condition Index, of the Wickford School, not Davisville School. And we did talk to Wright about this. It's a little bit more complex. So Wickford School is no longer going to serve as middle school. That is why it is qualified to be for replacement. It can be anything else, but as long as it's not a middle school, it can qualify for replacement for the 5%. It is now 56.95% FCI, which is very close to 65, and that evaluation was done in 2017, I believe, last time when Wright did that. So Wright welcomes reevaluating buildings that are close to 65, and we did this discuss the options that we have in place. We can have RIDE do it, they do it periodically, but it will likely we have to wait until a full approval in place. If we want to do it prior to that, so we know for sure if we are going to able to apply for that point, the district can do it in-house by a third party. And we did start those conversations. And what it entails is that there is a standard procedure. The third party goes into the building and reevaluates, writes a report, and then RIDE goes into the site and confirms that the findings are accurate. Based on my conversations with RIDE, it is a very feasible target to have. Should that option fail, there is always also a sustainability target, which is 1 to 4%. It's actually, I'm sorry, it's 2 to 4%. I did say 1 to 4. I think it's minimum of 2. It's 2, 3, and 4 of additional reimbursements if the project is exceeding certain criteria and above code and CHIPS compliance. So net zero targets, air quality, energy efficiency, and such. We should still target all of these, and in the future there could be a chance that the district RIDE may allow districts to apply for those sustainability points even if they receive above 20%. Right now it's not the case, but there are conversations about it. That's why these are the points that we hope to achieve.
So with our current project, our reimbursement can range anywhere from 45% to 55% reimbursement from the state. And that goes directly to the cost of the project.
Can I just ask a question on that? So 45% to 55, or is it 45 to 59? Can we give the extra?
So right now, today, the way it is that reimbursement is capped at 20.
Okay.
So
even with the net,
right,
with the energy.
even the net zero.
Oh, wow.
So they allow you, so the sustainability points, for example, if you only receive 15, you can go and get more.
Okay, I thought the state law allowed the extra.
Not right now,
Okay.
but there are conversations about it.
Okay, thank you.
So there's hope that by the time the project is completed.
But that's going to General Assembly for approval.
Correct.
And so if it is approved, then we can get the additional.
I thought it was, I didn't realize that. Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Currently, this current project doesn't meet the guidelines for the educational enhancements, correct? Because we are not dealing with early childhood or career and tech?
No, you do qualify for educational enhancements because you are building a facility with an enhanced educational program. So RIDE, any new building that you build will qualify for educational enhancements. Health, safety, and educational enhancements is sort of those given ones. You always get them because you made a building better, and it's a newer, and it's a more, it's a facility that meets the 21st century education.
Okay, so the such as early childhood, those aren't the only qualifiers
No,
for
those
that?
are just examples. Those are literally word to word from the RIDE's website. So.
Any other questions on this? Thank you. So the next agenda item is to discuss possible reuse options of the existing Davison middle school system. So if we do go through with this project, if it's approved prior to the demolition of the building, and we want to inquire, what systems within that building could possibly be reused? Are there any systems that could be reused in a newer building?
We did have some discussions, and I don't know how much could be reused in the new building. However, if there are some items that could be reused in
other buildings. Not necessarily the new building. We want to mix in older products with a brand new building, but I think we have plenty of schools that we could repurpose
other
doors, boilers, something. The boilers aren't that old, so I think that'd be one of the things we look at. and the doors are brand new, so those are the, you know, the major features. That doors are pretty standard, right? Like, it's 3.0s and 6.0s, and so that it's easy to find other buildings in the district. Pull one out, put one in.
It would not be possible to reuse the systems in the new building because the building remains operational, so you can't take doors off and put it.
So what about like, you know, the exterior doors that were there, because those are newer, right?
Right,
So
that's what I'm
something
saying, so
like
we
that
could,
then
yeah, we could potentially
like
use those
elsewhere.
at another elementary school, or, you know, somewhere like that.
Typically, when you're doing this kind of swap, you gotta leave the existing building fully operational to the very last moment. Then you're moving into a fully equipped, fully furnished new building, and then you're dismantling. You don't really have an overlap time where you can say, take a boiler and move it over, or an air handler. It just doesn't work. It's the timing issue.
But there's potential of some of the systems that are there that could be reused elsewhere if there's a need in other buildings.
Absolutely. So if there are things that are still usable, they can be salvaged, and we'll identify that in the demolition drawing. So they're carefully put aside and delivered to the district for reuse wherever you need it. We've often seen that on, you know, relatively new generators, sometimes boilers, sometimes air handlers. It all depends on the condition and, you know, what the equipment is.
What about the windows? I mean, Davisville School was replaced over what, a couple of years ago?
I mean, there's a potential, but they're not like doors. You know, windows come in a million different sizes. Doors are pretty standard in sizes from one opening to the next. So the windows, I'm not sure about, but I believe the doors and the boilers are things we can look at.
It's also important to remember the building will be still operating until at least 2027. So it is quite some time that needs to be, for this building to be operational, and it has to be maintained. Whether it's, we're building a new one or not, we still have to maintain the building, keep it safe, secure, and functional.
Is there a generator?
Yeah, but it's an older, built into the, it's inside a room in the building. That's it.
Yes.
Maybe this is looking too far into the future, but, you know, we're talking about savings. And I wonder, and at a lot of these meetings, people say, why aren't, you know, we've got all these other buildings that need things fixed. Is there any plan or any way that some of these savings can be put in a revolving fund like they've done at Lincoln, to help pay for fixes in other schools? And is that something, I don't know when you start thinking about that, or if that's a possibility?
Are you saying, looking at any sustainability of like energy efficient systems that we put into the new school that then saves?
No, just like reimbursements, or say if Whitford Middle School is maybe miraculously sold, you know, that money, can this, you know, how can any of this be applied to the concerns of a lot of the community about all our other schools?
Right, so my understanding with the reimbursements, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reimbursements come back as housing aid, and if we're taking a bond, my understanding is those reimbursements have to go back on the payment of the bond.
That is correct. That goes to the town as housing.
Right. So you know, when we talk about the reimbursement of anywhere from 45 to 55%, that does have to go back and pay off the bond.
Okay. Or maybe, I mean, you actually had sort of, I think, mentioned it, maybe savings from net zero.
Right, and I think that is something to look into, right? So, you know, we have opportunities to really look at sustainability options in building a new school. So just in general, building a new school, you're gonna have newer systems which are more sustainable. But there's also, you know, the conversation needs to happen about renewable energy. And so, you know, if we're able to put renewable energy in there, that's gonna bring down costs. That's gonna cut costs around, you know, electricity, for example. So, you know, when that happens, you can then look at the funds that you would be putting into paying electricity at the middle school, and if that's being generated by renewable energy, you then can reallocate where those funds were going, so that way you're making sure that you are putting funds into the other schools. There's also legislation in place about maintenance of buildings. So if we're doing this and we're getting a reimbursement back from the state, there's then a requirement of a certain percentage of your operating budget that has to be put into maintaining your schools. And that's something we'd have to look at. Are we going to look at the option of looking at the building size and square footage of buildings, and then that's the percentage of your operating budget? Or are you going to look at the cost of the schools? And you got to weigh what is a better budgeting tactic of having to take a certain percentage of your operating costs to have to put back into maintenance of your buildings. Because the whole purpose, if you're rebuilding schools, the state wants you to also make sure you're maintaining your schools. And it's really important that as we look at this project, we're also looking at all of the other schools too. And we need to look at our capital improvement plan across the district and look at the other needs in all of the buildings as we're doing this. Did that answer your question?
Kind of dovetailing with that, is there any opportunity if the project miraculously came in substantially under budget, that the bonded amount, if there was something left over, that you could use that to reinvest in the deficiencies that exist?
Yes, that's my understanding of the bond and the way it's written, that yes, if we, the project cost coming under means then there's funds that can be allocated to invest in other school buildings.
I mean, I think that's,
There's a caveat to that, now that we're going to work towards the stage 2 application, if the project is estimated at this stage is lower, we can then choose to put more work into the stage 2 application, so that the memorandum of agreement from RIDE includes those projects. And keep it to 167, and then you can always go and do the project. If you do not have those projects identified in the memorandum of agreement with RIDE, you can certainly pass a bond, so bond is your funding, but there will be a need for another stage 2 application to RIDE where those funds can be applicable to. So it's a two-step process.
And now, if we did get our estimates and we were coming in under the 167 and we added some other projects, would we then be packaging them so that we're actually getting a maximum reimbursement?
Yes.
So right now, if we replace a roof, we get 35%
yes.
back. But if we got estimates and this project came in lower and we added a roof with the middle school, we would actually get between 45 and 55% back on the roof and the middle school.
As long as you wait and submit everything at once as a bundle, RIDE will reimburse at the maximum allowable for the entire amount. Often what I see is districts want to get reimbursed on those smaller projects quicker, and they don't wait until the big one is complete, so they forego that reimbursement.
But that's a strategy we
That's
would
a
have to work out
strategy that you can choose
to get
to go.
here
Correct.
to look at working with our finance department. When do we want to put those projects in for reimbursement? Because if you're what you're saying, if we can wait to package certain projects together, we will get more reimbursements back on those projects.
And I would also want to make sure that we didn't have any unknown contingencies come up in year 2 or 3 once we break ground. We've already spent some of that money, so I would also want to be somewhat cautious instead of going into real solid footing with the existing building.
So the bond language was purposely worded so that way if the middle school did come in under budget, the money could be spent for other projects. However, you just said something that I just want to confirm, that let's say the middle school comes in at 145. And so we have $22 million to spend. And we decide to spend those $22 million on repairs to 3 elementary schools.
Okay.
You're saying that the $22 million, as long as we put it together into one project, we'll still get the 55% reimbursement, even though the repairs to the elementary schools may not necessarily hit the bonus points.
Correct.
Excellent. Okay.
But you do have to have it in this MOA.
Yes.
That's the key.
Yep, good.
So we can plan ahead of what we think we can do, and we have to make sure that we complete 50% of the projects. right? So we can go into this and say, okay, we may have an estimate of where we think the project's gonna come in at, right, come in under. And then take that amount of money that we believe we're gonna have left over. Let's do some forward thinking and really kind of look at our capital improvement plan and look at what's needed in the other buildings, put that into the stage 2 or the MOA that you're saying. And as long as we complete 50% of the projects by the end of the timeline of this necessity of construction plan, we will still be in with our requirements of fulfilling this for RIDE. So just because we put something, and just make sure everyone understands, just because we say we're going to do X and we don't get to it, it's not going to hurt us, because we have to make sure you complete at least 50%. And if you're building a new middle school, that's more than 50% of the project. Yes.
Just, you know, in the whole world of like message is everything, you know, in terms of from the taxpayer perspective in the town, it becomes that much more palatable, the entire project. If you're, even if it's not certain, but if you're addressing shortcomings in elementary schools as part of this whole piece, it's not that everything's being spent just on the new middle school, but it's also going to enhance these other schools as well. I think, you know, for taxpayers, that's a huge piece of the message that needs to get out there. And it makes it really, really important to make sure that this is all packaged together at the same time, particularly in light of the 55%, if that's correct, reimbursement. I mean, I think this is a potential PR point that's really huge.
As long as you're not robbing Peter.
Right. And again, there is an assumption there that, you know, is it possible that this can come in under that budget figure in 3 years, right?
Anything else for anyone?
Yes. Mr. Waterman, the capital improvements list that you had presented to the town council, I want to say was about 90 million total. What was the bottom line figure for all the schools?
So that was a rough draft of one where we don't have the finalized one yet. That's part of what we were working towards when we had the September submission. That's kind of now been, we have more time on it, so it's something that may end up ultimately coming back. But there was, that number sounds about right. But that was a draft of one of projects at schools.
But the bottom line is the amount of money to work off 100% of the capital improvement items is in excess of whatever extra funds might be available from the bond.
To do the complete list, but now let's work. So if we're working under an assumption, Wickford and Davis were both included on that. So we wouldn't necessarily be doing too many heavy investments into buildings if we're going to be closing them. You know, we wouldn't be looking at roofs, windows, doors at Wickford. So that would take a large chunk out of that estimated dollar amount, as well as there are projects that have associated dollars that the facilities department can do. So those projects were included in that. Our next step would be bringing that list to this group here and identifying the projects that are of the most importance. Now, RIDE helps us out a little bit with that. They have priority 1 and 2 projects, which are health and safety. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they're both 1 and 2. And then we have to characterize other projects as 3, 4, and 5. A lot of times, category 5 projects are ones that can be done in-house. 1 through 4, traditionally, you need outside experts to come in. A lot of the projects are category 5, and they're quite overwhelming for a maintenance department to do, but it's a target for what they focus on.
And I have a follow-up question. So the presentation basically implied that the existing Davisville Middle School would be demolished as soon as the new Davisville Middle School was erected and complete and habitable. That's correct, right?
So my understanding, now we haven't talked timeline, is I know on the previous site, we were looking at roughly the spring construction wrap up. As soon as the school year ended in June, the deconstruction or demolition of the site would happen. The kids would start in fall in the North Kingstown Middle School, and then the deconstruction, some of that may have already taken place, and they may be building the fields at that point.
Right, and that would also be the case if the school committee opted for 2 smaller 600 student schools, is that correct?
I was not at the last meeting, so I wasn't part of the conversations when 2 middle schools were discussed. I think there would be some timeline implications.
Yeah. So when we shared the plans, in building 2 separate middle schools, you would still have to, you have to build the schools first, then demolish,
The takeaway being though is that once the new school had been built, the old school would be demolished, correct?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
And then if we look at the 2-school plan, just to make sure I understand correctly, is the same thing true for the current Wickford Middle School?
So we still need to find out exactly through the Historic Association if Wickford could be demolished, because also too, when you have 2 schools that you're not using, you have to go through the Housing Building Authority as well.
So we will have to, if I understand the question, we will have to go through the State Housing Authority, even on this point, because we are demolishing Davisville Middle School. This will be a very light lift, but we will need their approval because we're not using it for affordable housing. We're gonna close it, and they'll say, wait a minute, affordable housing, we'll say, no, we wanna demolish it, we need to build fields. They'll probably say yes to that. The Wickford Middle School, it is a contributing historic factor. We don't think that's gonna be an issue. However, I do know that once we vacate Wickford Middle, getting State Housing Authority on that building will be a heavier lift than this, if that answers everything. So the historic, I think, will be a light lift. Not using it for affordable will be a heavy lift. That's just my gut reaction from the individuals that I talked to down at the state. So, but this will be a very light lift.
Okay, thank you.
And one last thing, I'm sorry. So I just want to be full disclosure. However, if you, and I'm not leaning towards one thing or the other. If you vacated Wickford Middle School and you built a new middle school in front, and then you had to demolish it, that's a light lift. Because you need it. See, when you're replacing a school with a school, they'll say, we understand. You need it for like this. So demolishing Davisville and building a new school and then needing it for fields, and demolishing Wickford and building a new school and needing it for fields, light lift. Having one school and then vacating Wickford Middle, that's the heavy lift. If that makes sense. Not saying it can't be done, but that's the heavy lift, just for full disclosure.
Any other questions or comments? So the next agenda item is next steps of what we need to be doing prior to our next meeting. So I know there's some additional work on your end that you will be doing that you reviewed earlier. On our end, we're looking at the transportation. I've talked with Mike and Michelle Holmes, our transportation supervisor, and looking at getting some sample of bus routes. I think it's important that we are doing that now. The goal is to have sampling of routes of what it would look like from the southern end of town to the Davisville site now, to look at that for timing wise. And so hopefully we're able to have something ready for our next meeting. I know we don't have a date yet, but if we're meeting in a few weeks, I've asked Mike and Michelle to work on that so we can have that as a discussion point as well.
So question, and I'll defer to you. When you get those transportation information, do you think that should go to the school committee before it comes to us?
It can. I think timing wise we can see where that goes, but I think it's helpful information just for us to be discussing as well.
So I know that I think that's important for them because they're going to determine where the school is, how many schools are going to determine that. But my point is, I think for them to address transportation, I think the public's going to get some relief over that. So I think the school committee should get that, but I'll defer to you.
Yeah, and I think also too, having Mike and I here at this committee, and sharing that, all that would go through us first before going to the school committee. But I understand what you're saying, making sure they're aware. We do have 2 school committee members here on the committee, but I still think it's a good use of our time to be reviewing that.
Sounds good.
Nothing else, I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.